Today is May 15th. The year is 2024, and I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota to see Kathryn Savage, an author who is responsible for one of the most important works of our time in Groundglass. A couple years ago, a friend of mine urged me to read this book, and I think part of that was because I lived in St. Paul, Minnesota for 3.5 years, and she knew I'd want to read a story so intimately connected to place in Minnesota. But I also think she knew Kathryn is the kind of writer that I yearn for, I crave in this life. Someone who sees the connection between people, between each other, between us and the land, and how all of us share in our experiences, joy and love, grief and pain. And she does that so well in this book to help us see the connections, feel those connections between each other and the land. And this book is also in conversation with like a million other books, which is just how my brain works. And so I love that element of it too. But I was blown away by this book, and it's become one of those that I go back to quite frequently to read, both for comfort, but also to stir me to action. I think any good writing should do that, induce you to change the course of your life in some meaningful way. And Kathryn has definitely helped me do that, and so I thank her for that. But not long after I read the book, I actually got to meet Kathryn for the first time, where else other than the Eudora Welty House and Garden in Jackson, Mississippi, doing a reading with Katie Simpson Smith. And I got to spend some time with Kathryn after the event. And it was there that I realized that I really do want to connect with her and share her work and who she is through my own. She's a very warm and inviting and thoughtful person. She's incredibly intelligent. It's that sort of quiet intelligence, non-promotional intelligence that I love in people, and that's what Kathryn has. The well of knowledge and compassion and curiosity in Kathryn is almost unparalleled of all the people I've met in my life. And that's something that I'm really drawn to. And so it took a while for me to reach out and for us to get together. But when I asked her to do Books on the Bed, I was really excited that she said yes. And I can't wait to see what books that she chose for today. But before I go over to see Kathryn and have this conversation for the podcast, I spent the morning at the Bdote, which is the site of the origin story for the Dakota people. It's a really sacred place. Now, they've since named it Pike Island for Zebulon Pike, and that guy has enough shit named after him, also not worthy of it all. So it's the Bdote, which is the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. It generally means where two waters come together. And this was a safe haven for me when I was in St. Paul for those 3.5 years. I really don't know how I would have survived in that mess of a metropolis without this place to come and find some sort of tranquility and serenity in the middle of it all. And I think confluence is an appropriate word for today, maybe even a theme of all the work I do. Two bodies of water coming together, two lives joining, people meeting, friends being made. And I'm really, really glad that my life is being joined with Kathryn's and that we get to have this conversation. I'm going to go over to the Humboldt industrial area afterward to get a sense of what Kathryn was writing about when she wrote Groundglass and to really be there with her. So I'm going to head over there now. Cannot wait for this, and I can't wait to share it with you. I hope you enjoy it. You're listening to Books on the Bed, where I travel through the country asking our hosts, if I came to your town and stayed at your house, what books would you put on my bed? Each host will share 6 books for me to carry with me on the journey of my life. And I'm here to share those books with you. As we go, We're building a digital library with every book put on every bed across the country. And who knows, maybe someday, the world. We are trying to share as many diverse stories as possible to part a curtain between us and bring us closer to each other. We hope these books and conversations make a meaningful difference in your life. Thank you for listening and being with us on this journey. There's a couple things I want to address because I've told you how much I love Groundglass.
Thank you.
And when I mean it's one of the most special books to me the last few years.
Oh, thank you so much.
I keep going back to it.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I was thinking about this morning when I was walking, why I go back to certain books and specifically Groundglass. And then I was like, okay, what's the common denominator here?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about my favorite authors.
Yeah.
Willa Cather.
Yeah.
And she uses this language of something entire, right? That happiness is dissolving into something complete and great.
Yeah.
You know, Eudora Welty, confluence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm standing at the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota, and it's that idea of meeting points between people or things, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, okay. And then even when I interviewed James McBride last year at the Book Fest, in the Heaven and Earth grocery store, the one thing that I underlined that I keep coming back to, I won't go in detail about it all, but there's a scene where someone is describing a system of tunnels, essentially, that's going to help these people rescue someone they love from a bad situation.
Okay.
And this woman is kind of mysterious, is speaking in abstractions because she doesn't want to be tied to helping them. Right? So she's not using any direct language. And so she's making all these explanations about where to go and what to do. And one of the guys interrupts her and is like, what does eggs have to do with tunnels? And she says back to him, eggs got everything to do with tunnels. Everything got everything to do with everything. And so, and then Terry Tempest Williams, Finding Beauty in a Broken World. The one thing that I realize is you have that similar focus on connection between disparate things and illuminating those for people like me that might not know about where you grew up.
Thank you.
Or Tar Creek or any of these things. So that's I think it's in that realm of special books to me.
Thank you.
Because of that. And it made sense. But the reason I tell you all of that is because you're going to love to know that just a couple of days ago, I talked with Lauren Waters.
Oh.
And Meet Me at the Creek is going to come to Silva and Franklin.
Awesome.
In August.
Awesome.
And I wouldn't have met her.
Oh, wow.
If it wasn't for you.
Oh, isn't Lauren amazing?
Oh my gosh.
Lauren's amazing.
Yeah. And so I watched the film. She sent it to me. And, you know, again, it's just like you never know who you're going to connect when you write a book. Like you never know how it's going to impact people.
It's so true. Yeah.
And that, to me, that was like just so beautiful.
So cool. I love that.
And so we were talking about how we both found our way to your book and how much we admire you and appreciate your generosity. And so we were just like, oh yeah, this is great. But that's the power of a book.
Yeah.
That's why you write, is you connect people. So I thought that was pretty special.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you for telling me that. Wow.
Yeah, I got really excited.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And so with that.
That's so cool.
Because your writing is such a gift.
Yeah. What?
I have two gifts for you.
Oh,
I start every interview this way because what you give to us, right, deserves something back.
Thank you.
And you can open them now if you want.
I do want
If you want to talk about those. So the first one on top, When in Milkweed Country.
Yeah.
I think you'll appreciate this book.
This is beautiful wrapping paper. Wow. Thank you, Matt.
City Lights Bookstore in Silva.
I know, it's so exciting, Harry. Harry's like more excited than me, maybe. What is it? What is it? What is it? It's probably not a bone. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Oh, awesome. I do not have this book.
I have a sense.
Okay.
Read the first paragraph on the back.
Okay.
Like
cool.
what is said.
Oh, cool. Amazing.
It is a very, like, it's a beautiful book. It's really unique
Thank you
in how
so
it's
much,
written.
Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
so
Caroline's
much.
actually in Ann Arbor. So that was a
Amazing.
fun connection. And she's
Okay.
coming to read at City Lights in Silva in August
Oh, cool.
with Glennis Redmond.
Oh, amazing.
So anyway, I was like, yeah, you're going to love that one.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. The other one?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a throwback. This is a
cool.
classic that I believe more people should read. And it's of the Appalachian region.
Amazing.
Which, you know, as we're sharing stories, I'm like kind of bringing different regions to other regions.
Yes. Nice.
You might have read her before, maybe not, but I think this book goes along with your themes and your life.
Very cool. Harry, what's it
Right,
going to be?
Harry?
It's not going to be a bone. It's not going to be a bone.
Oh, he's so sad. It's a book.
I'm sorry. Oh, I don't have this. This is awesome. Very cool.
I feel like
Okay.
you'll resonate with Wilma's
Okay.
story of, what happens when you get further from the land with technology
Yeah.
and industry and what that does. So it's a story of a family farm and its development over generations. And so there just felt like something there, some sort of kinship with you and Wilma. And I was told about her by a professor at Western when I moved to North Carolina, and Wilma quickly went to that tier of Eudora Welty and Willa Cather for me. So
thank you.
Yes, of course.
That's so kind. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for giving us beautiful stories.
Oh,
You deserve at least gifts of books.
my favorite gifts. Thank you. That's really, really nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how I like to start.
Cool.
And I was hoping before we get to the books that you're going to present, you didn't stray too far from home here.
Yeah.
I was over at the Humboldt industrial area.
Yeah.
And kind of thinking about your writing.
Yeah.
And, I didn't spend much time over there when I lived here.
Sure.
So if you could describe your relationship to this place, and specifically because there was something you said in Groundglass that was really interesting, of just even though this place has negative feelings because of what you know about contamination and industry, it's also comforting to be in this place. So can you talk about where we are and how it plays into your character as a human?
Yeah, I think, I was a student at the U of M, and I was in graduate school, and I went back to school. I got an MFA in fiction writing, and then I was writing more poems, and I went back to the U, and I was getting a degree in poetry. And one thing that is really beautiful about their MFA program is you can take classes outside of the creative writing track that you're on. And so I'm a pretty shy, private person, and I knew that I wanted to have a little bit more, a little bit less like fear when I was giving readings and sharing my work in public. And so I actually decided to take a class in the theater department.
What?
Yeah, I took a class called Performance and Social Change. And it was a really beautiful class about, so many more kind of performative modes of artwork informed by social justice. And one of our assignments was to, and I feel bad because I don't exactly remember what the assignment was, but where it led me was to decide that I wanted to go visit my childhood home, which I'd long moved out of. My family had no more ties to that specific home, but I knew that it was on a street that went into a cul-de-sac, dead-ended in a cul-de-sac, and then that cul-de-sac on the other side of it was a large industrial rail yard. And I had been working on Groundglass, and I was writing about home, and I was writing about industrial pollution. And I just decided one day, I'm just going to take a drive through my old neighborhood. And so I drove there, and at first I just went and parked in front of my house. And then I did something that I had never done before, which was I decided to try to go all the way around the industrial yard and kind of see how far it went and see more than I had ever seen before. And I was so surprised to see how sprawling it was. It really felt bigger than I ever thought it was as a place.
Huge.
It's a huge
it's
place.
It's massive, because I was just driving around it and I had forgotten the scale.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And I do really think a lot about, what writing is for me and what reading is for me is it's a way to slow my attention, and it's a way to pay a closer kind of attention. And that's very important to me. And so this drive as a way of relating to place, it was a way to be in it, but to be curious about it, to be in it and not to try to even really understand it, but just to experience it from a different vantage point.
Yeah, that's interesting, of the difference between paying attention to something just to be present.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to intellectually think of understanding it as you go. There's a very big difference.
There is.
And sometimes it's hard to do the former, right? To just pay attention.
It's true.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you took a theater class, though.
It was a theater class that got me to go back home.
So were you surprised at its effect on you to go back after being away?
I was surprised. The saying, you can never go home again. I think that when I moved back to Minneapolis, I grew up here. I lived away for over a decade. And when I moved back, just in terms of this idea of like a homecoming, more reflective of kind of thinking about this place, the city, it wasn't the same place that I left, and I wasn't the same person that I had been. It was really, such a sort of new city to me. And so in a way, with this thinking about Groundglass and thinking about writing about place and writing about home, that feeling of kind of a new avenue in knowing a familiar place, I think was what my experience was. And to me, I think how that came out in my work, but I think just in my experience of engaging with a familiar place again, is there was no arrogance or no feeling of, oh, I've got this, I know this. It was more like, what don't I know? There's a lot I don't know. I'm very interested, but I felt deeply humbled by everything I didn't know. And I think that was very useful, because there was no almost sort of barrier of the familiar, no feeling of like, I already know this so well. So how can I be interested in this? It was almost more this feeling of, this is really familiar, but quite distant, or familiar, but informed by memory and nostalgia and these more affective registers of experience. And so to kind of come back home, I think it's been a lot of not even relearning, but a lot of learning, a lot of like growing in my relationship with this place.
Yeah. Your curiosity comes through in the writing.
Thank you.
Because I love, like even watching the documentary, Meet Me at the Creek, this idea of something that is old, like it can be new again.
Yeah.
Whether it's trying to, restore a creek or just see something in a new way. Yeah. I like that it doesn't have to be the old story, and it shouldn't be. So it's such a beautiful book, and it's cool to know that background with the theater class, because even when we talked on the phone, I know you were like, yeah, I like talking about other people's beautiful writing, not necessarily myself, but, thinking about you at the Welty House, and it's so important that you share this.
Thank you.
Because it can have very far-reaching effects for people's understanding of places that, how many people know about the Humboldt industrial area, even in the Twin Cities? You got to think, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and something that I learned when I started to research and write about Superfunds and brownfields, and think both locally, but also think more broadly about legacy pollution, industrial pollution in other cities. I remember encountering a statistic when I was researching. The book was about 5 years in the making, and it was a number, something like 60% of the U.S. population lives within 3 miles of a Superfund or brownfield. And that was flagged as inaccurate during the fact check, because in the years since I started researching and the book was being fact checked, the statistic had gone up by a percentage or two. And so just to think about how hidden in plain sight industrial pollution is, and to really realize that while this is a very intimate book and it's a very personal story, the story of losing my father to a form of cancer that can occur at higher rates in polluted areas, to think about how many people do experience exposure to industrial contaminants, it, to me, made this book feel less solipsistic and more like a way to think about just a much bigger scale of, civic relationship with place.
It's interesting in the section that you talk about your relationship with Rebecca Jim.
Yeah.
There was one paragraph that really, really pierced me, where you finish by talking about that perhaps, your father would be happy knowing that through death you made that relationship, because the way you connect these stories across the country is really, to me, what elevates that book.
Thank you.
Because it's not local. It always is. But all of you share the trauma.
Yeah.
And the loss. And to have you all come together, and then you saying that really hit home, is that actually it's really sad to lose things, but when you can connect with people that are trying to do the same thing, right? Fight for a place. And heal and grieve together. It was really special to see that connection happen, even through a really painful experience. But can you talk about your relationships with the others in that book so that people can understand where you were coming from with different regions and their struggles as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Rebecca Jim is an incredible environmental justice organizer who's based in northeastern Oklahoma. And she is, and has been for many, many decades, advocating for and working for the remediation of Tar Creek, which is a deeply contaminated waterway in northeastern Oklahoma. And Rebecca Jim is an incredible environmental justice organizer, Cherokee elder, Tar Creek keeper. And, we met when I was living in Tulsa. And Rebecca, in addition to just being all around one of the most dynamic and lovely and hopeful and wonderful and kind and generous people I've ever had the honor of meeting, is also just deeply open to new connections, new friendships, new relationships. And so it was, I remember sending an email and we talked on the phone, and then not too long had passed and I was at Rebecca's, organization, kind of drinking Coca-Cola, talking about pollution.
Is that enthusiasm we were talking about? That's what, she has that.
Very, very much so. Very generous woman. And so Rebecca Jim is, she leads an organization in northeastern Oklahoma, Local Environmental Action Demanded, and they've been working on the remediation of Tar Creek. But I think, just to begin any kind of a research-based writing project and meet people who share their wisdom and share their story and share their time, with me, that was not something I expected or anticipated. I didn't really know how to do that. I have no formal training in journalism or anything. It was just a lot of hey, could we have a conversation? And so much of the time, of course, it's not a yes, but the people who I met through Groundglass were by and large just incredibly lovely and generous people. And Keisha Brown, who also is someone who I interviewed in Groundglass, is an incredible environmental justice organizer who I met, who's been doing a lot of advocacy work in the Birmingham, Alabama area, and has been and is involved with an organization called the Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution. And we just did an event together was maybe 6 months ago.
That's awesome.
Which was wonderful. And just meeting wonderful people, through the space of this book, and sharing stories has been a true joy of a book about grief. I didn't expect to write a book about loss and grief and find incredible people who I now call my friends.
Yeah, the joy comes from that.
Yeah.
It's unexpected, but welcome, right?
Yeah.
To have these people in your lives now forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, that's really cool. And I like to give people a sense of kind of where we're operating from, and that you're so intimately connected to this place. But because whatever you share, right, it's always going to be connected to something bigger.
Yeah.
I think there was an interesting quote you had in a recent interview that writing isn't activism in the same way that Rebecca Jim does it.
Right.
And I don't remember exactly what you said, but what it does, there's an awakeness to it. That when you read something, you talked about going to, was it somewhere in Alaska?
Yeah, the Exit Glacier. Yeah.
And that because of reading other people's stories, you were more aware of a place. You were able to pay attention more.
Yeah.
It slows down
Yeah.
your relationship to time. And then now you can more deeply engage with these places. And so I think in some ways that is a huge part of what a writer can do for all of us. And for me, who doesn't write, who doesn't do anything directly in terms of like a medium, right? I have these conversations, but it's because all of you have allowed me to see things differently. And now I can go to all these places with a more intimate knowledge, have these conversations, share these books, share your work. And that's all because of writing. So I thought that was a good point.
Well, thank you for bringing that in. Yeah, I feel like it's, to me, it's important to celebrate everything that is important in this particular time. I mean, we need policy change and activists and stories and poems. And I think that the writing is not the policy work and the writing is not the activism. But I believe that all of these modes of paying attention and extending care, they're in dialogue. And I think that it's also, for me, a way to honor what stories can do is to think about really how truly unique storytelling is, in that it can be this very intimate type of engagement, right? Like it's something, that I've always loved about reading and writing, which is that aspect of how solitary it is. And so I think it's civic conceptually, but it's also very much not. And I feel like in a way, for me, in terms of honoring what activists and organizers do, and what those who are changing policy and working on climate action in this very direct, targeted campaign type of way, that work is so vital. And it's not what I do, but what I do is something else that can be in conversation with that good work.
Absolutely. And I think of what inspired the Story Made project, first and foremost, was a class I took at Michigan.
Yeah.
And similar to your performance in social change, it was called Literature and Social Change.
Yeah.
What difference can a story make?
Yeah.
And when I think back, that was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
How much that question has driven me to read more, to learn more, because the writers are for me, it was the first. That's why I used The Parting of a Curtain from Eudora Welty. Yeah, that's what it was. I'd never read James Baldwin. I'd never read Louise Erdrich. Yeah. I'd never read Ruby Fruit Jungle. Right, these were things that felt behind the curtain. And then you read these stories, and you start to feel this power. Yeah, right. This curiosity generating. I didn't want to let it die. Yeah. So I think what you're saying is true. People can offer something. Yeah. They're all in the same stream. Yeah. Right? They're working toward the same thing. And so, I just thought that was important to bring up because I loved that moment that you realize, like, this is what good writing can do and telling a story. But aside from that, let's talk about the books that you're putting on my bed here.
Cool. Let's talk about the books.
Let's go with the first one.
Okay. Well, they're a little bit. Is there a first one? Is there? I'm just going to put them on their side because they're not quite in any sort of order. And
that's okay.
I sort of cheated because I didn't limit myself to 6. I've got
I love it.
a few more here.
Do what you want.
Okay. All right. So
You really can't
should
do
I
it.
just pick one and then we talk about it?
Yeah, you get to drive why you picked them.
Okay. I'm gonna go with Joy Williams' Escapes. Have you read this?
No.
So I love this book so much, but there's one story in particular, which is the reason that I chose this book. And it's the title story called Escapes. Well, I love short stories, and I think this is probably one of my favorite short stories. It's a story about a girl who is going to go see a musician with her mother. Not a musician, a magician. She's going to go see a magician with her mother. And over the space of the story, we learn that probably they're not going to make it to go see the magician. And even if they make it, it's not going to be an easy time for the girl, because her mother's increasingly getting drunk as they're going to go see the magician. And so in so many ways, it's a story that is so subtle in what it sets up in terms of plot, but so deep in what it sets up in terms of this relationship within this family. And the moment for me that really makes this such an incredible story is this moment where what has happened is they've gone and they have sat in the theater, and at a certain point, the mother gets up and kind of gets on stage, and there's this sort of spectacle kind of breakdown of the fantasy of going and having like a nice time with mom. But they're at this diner, and the main character leaves this glove on and eats a donut, and the exact line is so beautiful. So one of the ushers has helped us mother and daughter out of the theater and has kind of ushered them to a coffee shop. And they're at the coffee shop, and there's this moment where he's, extending a kindness to the mother, and he says, "Look, I've pulled myself through. You can pull yourself through." We went into a coffee shop. This is from the daughter's point of view. We went into a coffee shop and sat down in a booth. "You can collect yourself in here," he said. "You can sit here as long as you want and drink coffee, and no one will make you leave." He asked me if I wanted a donut. I would not speak to him. If he addressed me again, I thought I would bite him. On the wall over the counter were pictures of sandwiches and pies. I did not want to be there, and I did not want to take off either my mittens or my coat. The little usher went up to the counter and brought back coffee for my mother and a donut on a plate for me. "Oh," my mother said, "what have I done?" And she swung her head from side to side. "I could tell right away about you," the usher said. "You've got to pull yourself together. It took jumping off a bridge for me and breaking both legs before I got turned around. You don't want to let it go that far." My mother looked at him. "I can't imagine," my mother said. Outside, a child passed by walking with her sled. She looked behind her often, and you could tell she was admiring the way the sled followed her so quickly on its runner. "Your mother," the usher said to my mother. "You've got to pull yourself through." His kindness made me feel he had tied us up with a rope. At last, he left us, and my mother laid her head down upon the table and fell asleep. I had never seen my mother sleeping, and I watched her as she must have once watched me, the same way everyone watches a sleeping thing, not knowing how it would turn out or when. And this is the moment I love. Then slowly I began to eat the donut with my mittened hands. The sour hair of the wool mingled with the tasteless crumbs, and this utterly absorbed my attention. I pretended someone was feeding me. And this is a story that is so much about the desire to be cared for and the desire to be nurtured. And this child has this moment of, through this performance of this mitten, imagining that care is coming not from within, but from someone outside the self. And I think it's such a gutting, beautiful moment.
Yeah, that got me. I was not ready. I wasn't sure where I was going. And then that line, whew.
That line.
Yeah, when did you first read this? Do you remember?
Yeah, I was a student of Laura Vandenberg's, and Laura had talked about this story and had talked about, Laura has a concept that I think is so incredibly true. And I think she named something that I love in short stories specifically, which is this moment where something that has been implied through subtext or something that has been sort of subterranean within the story comes up once very clearly. And Laura makes the case that that is an important moment in a story where what has been there but not looked at directly rises, and then it can really happen once. A story doesn't need much more than that.
Yeah.
And that moment with the mitten, that is when what has really happened here comes forward. And the reader cannot ignore how devastating what this day has been for this child is.
Yeah, that's giving me chills to think about, because moments are really important in life.
Yeah.
And so when that comes, right, it's almost all the feeling you have reading. And I haven't even read it, right? But then it comes out right in that moment. So I can even tell from that little bit. I like that sometimes you need other people to give you language for what you love about something.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really hard to explain why you love a story or what you love about stories.
It's very true.
And a lot of it's because it's such a personal connection. Like a lot of people, if you had asked me why I love Willa Cather, I'm having trouble navigating why.
Yeah.
There's just something there. And then eventually people, you pull moments. I think Elise, who taught that class at Michigan, she always used to say really interesting things, but like a kairotic moment. Right?
Oh, what's that?
She would talk like this momentous occasion is what she would say.
Yeah.
And that has always stuck with me.
Yeah.
Where there's this, that moment in the story where something comes to light.
Yeah.
That sort of breaks it open. And she talked about this in relationship to social change too. That there's these momentous occasions that things have been going on.
Yeah.
But we don't always know what's going on or might not be able to feel it. So I love that description, subterranean.
It makes me think that the momentous occasion is so personal in so much of the work that compels me. And I think you're right. I think I read for the momentous occasion. And I think that it's oftentimes like in escapes, it's a really subtle moment that is also quite momentous. I mean, I didn't pull, Joyce's The Dead off the shelf, but the ending of The Dead is that momentous occasion in a way of, having two characters really be feeling quite differently in a particular moment. And I love that so much in good stories.
And to me, the best stories are the ones where the momentous occasion is subtle.
It's quite subtle.
It doesn't feel like
a
momentous occasion, and especially if you were to just tell somebody without the context.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it good. Because everything, you could say leading to that, but really it's always there.
It's always
you just don't know it. So it's not like a direct line to it. So that's a good point. But just even you picking that out, I sensed why that moment would. I'm going to read that because now I need to know the whole picture. I'm curious though about because wasn't your dedication in the book to the daughters of a place and the mothers?
Yeah.
I'm curious what about this story really hit you personally when you first read it, and why that particular nurturing relationship affected you.
Yeah. Well, I think that there certainly is a personal connection. I think, having been raised by a mother who had some struggles in her life that made it hard for her to I think as often can happen in those maternal relationships, there were times where she wasn't fully present in her nurturing, of me. And I'm a mother, and I'm sure that my son can say that as well. I think it's so easy in relationships, I think, to miss the person that you love and not fully know how to give them what they need in love. And I'm very interested in that. And I think that as we've been talking, I've been thinking about how really what fiction does and what story does, and other forms, of course, memoir, poetry, but it's the momentous occasion for one person. It's not the momentous occasion for everybody in some kind of gloss of the universal. Like what we get through story is this intimacy and interiority. And I am fascinated by how hard it can be, I think, for people to really understand each other, and to give someone what they need in love is oftentimes, I think, quite hard. And so this story, I think, in terms of escapes, it's so much about nurture. The whole premise is quite sweet. A child's going to go see a magician, and their mother's going to take them. But what happens is this complete breakdown in care. The premise is one where care is kind of baked into what those relationships might be. But what happens is almost like antithetical to what a caring parent-child relationship is. And we as a reader experience how devastating it must be to be in that coffee shop. And I think that that's incredibly powerful.
And how many moments you think that something like that's happened that near you in life, and you didn't notice, because you don't know but it's like that. It really sucks not to be cared for in the way you need. And it's so frustrating, and it's really hard not to know how to care for someone, or just not be able to in the way you want to. So I think sometimes people think that careless people are that because they want to be. And I don't think it's that simple.
No.
I think understanding what another person needs, and not being able to give it, that is very difficult and then the shame that comes from that.
Yeah.
And I think all of us have experienced it one way or another.
Yeah.
Whether it's obviously I'm not a father, but that disconnect.
Yeah. And I believe that this mother wanted to show her kid a good time.
Right.
That's the other thing that I think that's the other thing that makes this, to me, a really beautiful story. Is it's not a story of harsh judgment. It's not a story of moral high ground. It's not a story that skirts pain and misconnection, but it's also not a story that is interested in doling out judgment and blame for the sake of judgment and blame. It's quite complex in that way. And I think that's another thing that fiction gives us as readers, right? This experience of a complicated empathy where you can't really walk away clean and go, you can't leave not understanding a little bit about what everyone kind of has been through, I think, in this Joy Williams story.
A complicated empathy. I like that. Because, that's the thing about when I started reading, I was a pretty late bloomer in terms of reading fiction.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it almost hard up front, is that we so want to judge people. It is way easier to be like, what a horrible mother. Or, this person's making all the wrong decisions. But then reading, it's almost frustrating in the sense it's like, gosh, but I can't make it that simple. I can't just hate this person or judge this person. That's the important part, is it gives you that sense of, I always like good questions.
Yeah.
When you think of what someone's going through. And I think that's what fiction poses, these stories. And you then enter this space that you can't necessarily say you've experienced, but then it makes you say, actually, this is not an easy thing to judge. It's way, way more difficult than that. So.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I get one sports metaphor per conversation. And I mean, this kind of gets me thinking about when we were talking about attention a little bit ago. My son's an athlete, and I really have a hard time following baseball, and that's his passion. And I have to pay such close attention to that game to know it enough to be able to show him care by asking about really specific plays and things that happened in the game. And I feel like that's so much of what loving another person is. It's really like learning what they care about to show engagement, right? With something that is other than and outside of the self. And I feel like that's oftentimes what I'm being asked to do when I read, to pay attention to something and someone outside of myself. And that, I think, to me is it's a very high form of love, to step outside the self and to move toward another person and to show an active engagement in what they pay attention to by paying attention to those things as well.
See, this was why I always knew we'd be friends. Because that's the whole of life to me, is if you can give people that level of attention.
Yeah.
And again, I have privilege in being able to do
a lot about baseball? Is that what you're about to say?
No.
Okay.
I actually, well, I do because I played it, but it is one of the more difficult sports to be able to do what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas show them that you were paying attention.
Yeah.
I taught one of my ex-girlfriends, we went to Michigan together, and I grew up a huge Michigan football fan. Yeah. But we would watch football on Saturdays when we graduated, and she would like pick up on. But even that, like, it was a way of relating that she, and I would do the same thing for her. I read more books that were way out of my typical choices because of her, and yet I was better off for it, right? Yeah. So I think that's a beautiful thing too. But it's, when you're saying that, I've always thought about how much I've had my feelings hurt because I feel like I didn't get that from a lot of people, that attention. Yeah. And one of the things that I've always tried to do with Story Made is if I can go to where someone grew up, even down to the house, and I can sort of get close to their story, and I can read their dissertations or the books that they've read, and I can really start to try to, pay attention to the things that they were around and that affected them, right? That they talk about a lot. To me, that is a huge part of what I do, because it feels like not enough people go to that level to really say, this doesn't benefit me. Right. Right. We are a very much like what's in it for me. Yeah. Right? Well, understanding a human. Yeah. And wondering about them and talking to them about that. I mean, there's something in it. It might not be for you in the way that we think about it materially or for status, but that sort of level of connection, it's very important. People want to be asked about things that are important to them, but not in a generic way. Yeah. And it goes back to slowing down and being able to say, okay, let's look at this baseball game. It might be complex, but I can understand it if I pay attention. Yeah. So I like that metaphor. But although we were talking about baseball with my friend and his dad, it's like, who watches baseball anymore?
I do. I watch a lot of baseball. Yeah. I watch. Think of me.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm a much bigger basketball fan.
I'm a big football fan. It's a complicated sport in a lot of ways, but I can watch that game and get a lot of, pleasure from watching football. Yeah. It's I don't understand, but
it's weird. I feel like ashamed of how much I enjoy it. I do too. But it's fun. It's interesting. It's intriguing. Yeah. And Michigan winning the title this year was like so it all, like I said, I'm like almost embarrassed of how much it made me feel good and like emotional. Yeah. It was just like following a journey of a team and the drama of it. It is fun. And I used to think I had to choose, be intellectual or like sports. Yeah. But also, of course, the Wolves get good when I leave. Yeah. I love the NBA. I watched the playoffs all summer And I no longer think less of myself because of that. And I think if you do judge people that way, you need to rethink what it means to be intelligent or what a good life is. If it brings you joy and excitement, it's a good thing. But yeah, football, I love it.
I know so many, I mean, not so many, but I know some really phenomenal, like there's a group of us poets, artsy fartsy types who like love the Vikings in a way that we all feel a little bit weird about, I think. But
well, and you're going to have Michigan's quarterback now. J.J. McCarthy was drafted by the Vikings. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, that's interesting. Well, thank you for bringing up that book. I'm definitely, this is why I love it too, because I want to share these with people.
Yeah.
But I read so many of what people share.
Yeah. Yeah.
So selfishly, I get a up close look at these. Cool. Joy Williams, Escapes.
Should we go on to another one?
Next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a book that I decided to grab it because I'm reading it right now. And I am very into it. It's The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginsburg. But it's so fresh in my mind that, I don't even yet know quite how to talk about it.
Let's play it out.
It just does. It makes some moves that I think are really surprising. And the way that it is a book about rage is really exciting to me. It's a book where on the first page, the first person narrator asks her husband to tell her the truth. And he does a very odd thing in response. This is the way the book opens. "Tell me the truth," I said. "What truth?" he echoed. He was making a rapid sketch in his notebook, and now he showed me what it was, a long, long train with a big cloud of black smoke swirling over it, and himself leaning out of a window to wave a handkerchief. And then she kills him. The next line is, "I shot him between the eyes." I've never read a book like this. I've never read a book that goes for violence very fast.
That's the first page?
That's the first page. That's how the book opens. Now, this is a book that is back in print. It is back in print by New Directions.
Okay.
So New Directions reprinted this. It first was published in 1947.
Oh, so it's...
It's a book about, in so many ways, being married to someone who we come to kind of learn as the book evolves, has really been a very challenging husband. Not that that's a justification for murder, but it is a book that's back in print and has been described as a kind of feminist horror. And so I'm just really enjoying how after that very extreme and deeply violent opening, what plays out is operationally much more subtle. She takes a walk, kind of get into this retrospective, mode, learning about their relationship, learning about the lives of these characters. But it is a kind of psychological thriller. I mean, it makes me think of Patricia Highsmith and the Ripley books, where you have a kind of, you have a real inequality between them. And then this husband is doing these things where he'll just like lock rooms in their house and she won't be able to go in them. And you see this power imbalance and this kind of psychological abuse evolve as the novella evolves. It's a short book. It's only about 100 pages. But I don't think I've ever read a book that begins with a violent action and then gets a lot quieter. And that to me was something that I was very interested in. Is
that the move you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. It starts with a very violent act, and then it becomes a much more kind of meditative, this is who we were, this is who I am, kind of a meandering story. And so just at the level of structure, I think it's a very exciting novella.
Yeah, I like people that do something that shakes it up for you.
Yeah.
And that you don't expect.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I don't write, but I
Yeah.
can assume if you think you know what people will like,
Yeah.
it can be a struggle to, if maybe you have a different idea of what would be good for that story, to just do it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this. It's just like, nope, I'm going to go for it because
Yeah.
it makes sense for this story. And it's interesting that it was in the 40s
Yeah.
that it came out. That's a good cover, too.
It's a good cover.
I like that cover.
Yeah.
What induced you to read this?
It had been recommended by a friend. So, in a way, kind of a non-answer, but I'll just read the description because I definitely felt very drawn to this book after reading what it was about. It's a book that begins and ends with a matter-of-fact pronouncement. I shot him between the eyes. It's a book that explores loneliness, desperation, bitterness. What precedes this murder is a flighty husband. Stripped of any sentimentality, Ginsberg writes about rage. She transforms the unhappy tale of an ordinary dull marriage into a rich psychological thriller. So kind of like taking the ordinary and making it strange is something that I also really admire in the space of fiction.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I think that comes through in works that are perhaps more speculative or works of magical realism. I'm thinking of, Carmen Maria Machado's short stories. And one of the books that I grabbed is What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky by Leslie Neka Rima. And so this is a book that's more allegorical and that works with the speculative and magical realism to pose these kinds of almost allegorical social, cultural critiques. And I think that this book, The Dry Heart, is also posing critiques about this marriage in the 1940s that is much more shaped by control, a kind of control and obsession, much less informed by kind of equality and love. And so there is violence, but I think that in a way, and it's maybe a bit sort of, to me, it's been an interesting book to read and kind of a surprise that as dramatic as the opening is, it isn't the most dramatic element of the book. It's those kinds of more subtle psychological dynamics that are unfolding between this couple. And then what that gets me thinking about in terms of, all that was perhaps quite wrong, right, in the 1940s with the imbalance between, the power imbalance between this couple. So it's very quiet, very personal, very intimate book, but it's raising all these big questions about gender and society.
Yeah. Wow. I'm compelled because of that start. I mean, now it's just going to get me thinking about what books maybe open with something that feels like it's going to be the dramatic part.
Yeah.
But then actually you find out it's not that moment.
We've been schooled in the dramatic arc, right?
Yeah.
I think that as readers and writers, the idea of rising action is still very dominant. I mean, of course, writers are doing all kinds of different things with form and structure, but I think that I probably have mostly read books where there's an arc, there's rising action. The most dramatic moment does not happen on the third paragraph. It happens much later in the book. And so even to have something really profound happen right away, I think it really shifts my expectations, for what this novella will be.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I love that you made a connection with this one. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Have you read What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky?
I haven't read any of these yet, which is great.
This is a really beautiful book, and it is... it's a collection of short stories, and it's a collection of short stories by Leslie Neka Rima, who was born in the UK, grew up in Nigeria, and writes books that are sometimes rooted in realism and sometimes veer into magical realism, more speculative modes. There's one story in particular that I think is a really incredible example of this kind of combining aspects of realism with more surreal details of character and world building. Who Will Greet You at Home. And Who Will Greet You at Home is another book, or not a book, it's another story that is in some way interested in relationships between different generations of women. Motherhood is a big part of this world, but motherhood is also quite strange in this world. Mothers make babies out of different material, yarn, clay, and there is quite a lot of work early in the story to make sure the reader understands, what the world of motherhood is. So if you're a wealthy woman, you will form a child out of perhaps a more kind of delicate material. If you're not, you will reach for, and I'll read a passage, a sturdier, more practical material, something that can withstand the dents and scrapes that came from a life like hers. This is from the perspective of Ogechi, who is the point of view character. And Ogechi wants to make a child. You need to do quite a lot of things over the space of, I believe, a year to essentially gestate this child. It's a world entirely of women. There are no men anywhere in the story. But what I love so much about this story are the power dynamics between the different characters. It's absolutely fascinating. And there's a character who's named Mama, who has a transactional relationship with a lot of the younger women, many of whom work for her. And what Mama does is extract joy and empathy from people who have less power in the story. And so it's very much kind of blending the affective with the ways the story is thinking about capital and thinking about who has power over whom. And then I think it really just does this beautiful, incredible thing with making joy and empathy these parts of the characters' lives that can be controlled and extracted and taken away from them.
Interesting.
Which I think is really beautiful.
And making them a resource.
Right.
Is that...
Yeah, that can be abused.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting. That whole...
Yeah.
And when did you read this book?
Years ago. This came out in, was 2017. And the story was first published, I believe, in The New Yorker. And there's a really great interview with the author about how it's not a work of allegory necessarily, but it is kind of using some of the devices of allegory and of the speculative to talk about, in reality, some of the pressures that women may feel to become mothers. And it's a very compelling interview and a very good accompaniment to the story itself.
I'll have to look at that. And man, these are good. These are really good. I mean, again, these are, I didn't even know about these. So I very much appreciate this.
I'm so glad.
And the focus on women here.
Yeah.
That makes sense, I think. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Sure. Well, I'll bring in a new novel that, have you read An Ideal Presence?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. This is by Eduardo Berti, and it was, I believe, also published in the French first in 2017. The English translation was by Daniel Levin Becker in 2020, and I love this novel so much. If there was one book from this whole pile that I want you to run out and read right away,
okay,
it's this one.
Okay.
It's a very kind of genre blurring novel because it started as a work of nonfiction, at least just in its research aspect. So in 2015, Eduardo Berti spent many weeks in residence at a university hospital in France. And when he was in residency, Bertie was interviewing staff in a palliative care department and collecting stories from staff members, patients, their families, nurses, administrators, social workers, volunteers. This is a novel because it doesn't talk about anyone specifically, anyone in particular who he had talked to when he was in residency. But what it does structurally is it's a book where each chapter is told from the perspective of a particular person, and their name is given, and their role within the hospital is described. So nursing aide, nurse, there are medical secretaries, patients, doctors, intern nursing aide, beautician.
Wow.
And it moves between different first person, just glimpses from a day, not a full account, almost these snippets of micro memoir or what reads like that. But of course, it's a novel. And so it's this fictional account that is very much informed by place and that rotates, between a huge cast of characters.
I just love anything that has that deep research component.
I do too.
I know that you would, because you've done it, but that I would wonder if he thought it would be this.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know.
Like how you start with research, you might think it'll be one thing, because you've experienced that.
Yeah.
You've said that you weren't ever sure the direction Groundglass was going to take.
No, I wasn't.
But it's almost like, but this is why I think it's good not to rush.
Yeah.
That if you're doing research on something, don't just pick and say it has to be this.
Yeah.
Because you never know what's going to come from that living, that experience, that listening.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that it turned into these, you said they read like micro memoirs, right? But it's fiction.
Right.
So that's okay.
Well, and I also feel like, for writers who move between forms, and as a writer who moves between forms, I really do think that one thing genre can do is it can be an extension of the writer's ethical imaginary. And what I mean by that is I feel like, to research the lives of the living and the dying in a hospital and then to publish a work of oral history or testimony, very valuable, very important. And I can also imagine a writer making the decision that those aren't their stories to tell. And so then to move into more of an autofiction or more of a novel-like project is a way to also respect the privacy of those who were, entrusting you as the writer with their stories. And I'm not kind of over here saying one's better than the other, but I definitely think that for writers of nonfiction and poetry and fiction, there's a way that those different styles of writing are read by a reader. It's a different relationship that we're establishing with the reader. And I admire that as much as this book could be nonfiction and in so many respects reads that way, the choice that Bertie made, to me, feels like a choice that came out of wanting to dignify the stories that he'd been entrusted with when he was doing that research.
Yeah.
And I really respect a writer who thinks so deeply about those ethical considerations.
Yeah. Probably don't have enough people that do that, right? So when you see it, it's
Yeah.
I like that it's not about better or worse.
No,
it's
not
about
at all.
Clearly there was some deep deliberation about the way he was going to put these stories out there and share them, and it came out like this, which I'm curious why you got really excited about this novel.
Yeah.
What was it about, even more than the structure, you think that you would want, because you said you would want me, of all these, to read it right away.
Yeah.
Why is that, do you think?
I think one, a matter of taste. I'm really interested in books that are about specific jobs. I like that a lot as a reader. And this very much is that. It gets into like this world of this hospital. I like reading a book where a world that is sort of exclusive becomes more human. And hospitals are one of those places where, I'm always an outsider unless I were to have a job where I was working there. And not to say that they're an exclusive type of professional space, but I think that boundary is pretty rigid between patient and provider.
Yeah.
And it's such a place where there's something transactional that's always taking place. You're coming in for XYZ treatment, or you're accompanying someone as they're getting XYZ treatment if you're on, the patient or the caretaker side. And so they're not places where I've ever really lingered in my life. But I spent a lot of time in hospitals when my father was sick, and I realized I really find them to be fascinating places, because oftentimes these are places where there's birth and death. Both ends of the human experience are really active in hospitals. They're very consequential, but they're also not really lingered in. And so this book, it allowed me to spend time in a particular place that I find really compelling, but also in what goes on in these places.
I love that. Because it's because now my head's spinning of what are these places that we go to?
Yeah.
But you don't really stop to think about the roles and how they're carried out and all of the people that are doing these things. And now that you mention it, I like people who pay attention to that, who get curious about this exclusive space that almost feels like, what do we know about it?
Or maybe exclusive is the wrong word. I think more what I mean is a place of specialized knowledge, right? Like a place where...
Yeah. There's you almost feel apart from it because you don't know anything that's going on. So, and then, to let you into all of these worlds, not just one role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I like that.
I've started to work a little bit in the space of narrative medicine, and I've started to have some conversations with medical providers about poetry and creative writing. And one thing that I love when I'm talking about poetry with people who have a depth of medical knowledge that I lack and insight is they can bring that forward and respond to metaphor with this deep knowledge about the body, where a metaphor about a physical experience is then also read as sort of symptomatic, or it can. So it's just fascinating to me to think about all these layers of knowing.
Yeah. Well, I think you do that in Groundglass in a really powerful way of bringing this, the experience of illness and dying. Yeah. And talking about the body's relationship to the environment and the body as a site of contamination itself. Yeah. So you're already, this makes a lot of sense that you would be starting that. That's so cool that you're talking to them. And then, what they draw on from there, it's very esoteric. Yeah. Right? These people, these are highly trained. They're not poets, right? Yeah. But that they can respond to that. Yeah. I like that a lot. Can you tell me more about the narrative medicine?
What I've been doing is I've been working in, and I've only just started, I hope to do more, but working with medical professionals on basically writing to address burnout and to allow for some room to bring creativity into their life to process some of their work. It's hard stuff, if you're providing cancer care, and in a given day you might be giving 12 people a cancer diagnosis. So there are certain schools across the country that center narrative medicine, and it's really opportunities for medical professionals to connect with something more creative as an aspect of self-care.
Wow, what an awesome thing. Yeah. Have you let us say where you're doing it?
I've done it at the Mayo Clinic, and I hope to get involved with more.
Good stuff.
It's fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my brother, he's a substance abuse counselor in a prison.
Yeah.
And my sister-in-law is a psychiatric nurse at the county hospital.
Yeah.
And so I think often about even my life compared to that, the feelings they feel, the things they have to do and witness on a day-to-day basis. And it helps me realize our behavior differences too, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're in that environment, it's kind of like when I was a hall director. I didn't think that we're living in a residence hall. I suppose I didn't know the underside of the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
My alma mater.
Sure.
And so that weight, right?
Yeah.
So, but with doctors, it's even on another level. So I think that's really cool that you're doing that. Wow.
Thank you. I think it's important work to me. It feels in some ways like kind of a giving back, because when my father was sick with terminal cancer, they took great care of him. He had a great medical team, and to bring poetry into a hospital feels really lovely.
It's like we were talking about earlier. That's what you can give.
Yeah.
It's not medicine.
Right.
But it helps that.
Right.
Right. Just like you're helping these causes for people like Rebecca Jim. And you get to do that with doctors and nurses and everybody that's in this space. But, oh man, that's okay. I promise I will.
Let me know what you think.
I will read that.
Let me know
100%.
What you think.
Cool.
It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book.
So what about the next one?
Okay. Well, I'll just turn to poetry next. And this is a book called Fixer by Edgar Coontz, who is a poet, a wonderful poet. And I'm lucky to call Edgar a friend.
Cool.
And this is a great book about, just really so many things. But one thing that I am particularly drawn to is the way that Edgar writes about the speaker's father and the speaker's father's struggles with addiction, with fatherhood, with being kind of again in that caring relationship with his son. And it's a beautiful elegiac work. It's about love. And these are just incredibly gorgeous lyric narrative poems.
Would you mind reading one?
Sure.
Is there one that you can think of that you're like, oh yeah?
Yeah, there is. Class is also something that I think Edgar writes about very, very wonderfully. Real money. Late June and there's a shortage of air traffic controllers in the mid-Atlantic. Ads plastered everywhere I look. Competitive pay, union benefits. I already found a job, but I can't break the habit of hunting. I dig around and learn that though the suicide rates are astronomical, shifts are only 1 hour on, 1 hour off due to the extreme concentration required. You get paid both hours. My uncle used to work for a company that was contracted to paint all of the nuclear power plants in Massachusetts. Now he works for a company that's contracted to paint all the T-stops in the greater Boston area. They paint overnight when the trains are stabled. Beats the shit out of my last job, he says, plus they got ping pong tables in the break room at every station. They're meant for the conductors, he says, but hey, what they don't know. My youngest brother quit his job as a janitor at a middle school to start a landscaping company. Bought a crew cab and a trailer and a used ride-on mower he got, he says, for a bargain. He's staking signs, building a client list, mostly mowing, residential. No 401k, he says, but at least I set my own schedule. I take the day when it rains, except to pry off and sharpen the mower blades, file down the burrs. Dullness tears the grass. When you do it right, it's like you went out on your hands and knees and snipped each tuft with a pair of scissors. But 50 a pop only gets me so far. Now it's about leveling up. Corporate parks, estates, colleges. Like where you work. That's where the real money is.
That's good.
It's a beautiful poem. It's
Wow.
a beautiful poet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you know Edgar?
Oh, I'm very good friends with Edgar's partner. And we've just ran in some of the same circles, and I've been a huge fan of Edgar's work for years and years.
Now, do you teach any of these books?
I do. Yeah, I definitely do. Yeah, I've taught Edgar's poems. Often, and I've taught the story "What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky." I don't think I've ever taught the other works. I've taught Victoria Chang's "Dear Memory: Letters on Writing, Silence, and Grief." This is a book I assign almost every semester, which we haven't talked about yet, but it's a wonderful work of epistolary, collage, docu-poetic, ephemera, kind of gets into the family archives. And so I brought too many books. We don't have to talk about all of them. But,
no, this is great. This is great.
Cool.
Well, and it's interesting because part of with this particular podcast, I see as an extension of, that class, right? I thought back to that syllabus.
Yeah.
And, in one class, you can only talk about so many stories.
It's true.
And so in some ways, I'm like, now that I'm older, I'm like, that's what I hope that people get from this.
Yeah.
Is that this is kind of like lots of syllabi going out
to
the world from different writers and people that are talking about these books, so that people can read them and learn from them. And I hope it, especially with ones that aren't as consumed as, that aren't as known as they should be. But let's talk about this one. I'm really curious about it. I know my designer, he loves collage. He does that stuff on his own all the time.
Cool.
I'm going to have to take a picture of, I will, but then send that to him because he'll love that cover.
Oh yeah, no, this is a beautiful book. And I also really, I love, it's stating the obvious, of course, I love reading so much. And I think the reason that my first book is a deeply autotheoretical book is because think I needed to trick myself into writing a book by believing I was having a conversation with other writers and thinkers about their work. I mean, that piece of reading that is you get to spend time with somebody else thinking through their life and their ideas and their emotions is so meaningful to me that I do have a hard time talking about my work. And I think that part of it is just because I love reading so much that it's just so fun to think about other people's books.
Yeah, totally.
It's so much better.
And people always talk about, certain works being in conversation or intertextual.
Yeah.
I learned about so many books from your book.
It was the only way I could write a book.
It's the whole thing. But see, I like that because nothing we do has no source.
It's true. It's true.
So, and I think sometimes when I talk, I used to be more self-conscious about this, but I reference a lot of things in my conversation.
Yeah, I do too.
Because someone will ask me a question and then I'll tie in this movie, but because they're that important.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to ask me a question, of course I'm going to reference a book.
Yeah.
Or, certain poem, because it's the way I think of.
Yeah.
It helps me talk about it. So I like that you said that because, your book is very, very good for people that want to learn about more books.
It is a highly, it's a big conversation, I think, is how I think about it, how I like to think about it. It's having a conversation. I think this book by Victoria Chang, Dear Memory, Letters on Writing, Silence, and Grief, is also very much a book that is interested in having conversations. And so actually maybe this is my top recommendation for you now. This is you should look at it. This is a really beautiful book, and it is, it's essay in letters. So letters to the speaker's mother, letters to the speaker's grandmother, letters to silence, letters to those who are named by an initial, letters to the body, letters to influential teachers.
Wow.
And it's so intimate, right? In that way, in the way that epistolary gets to be. When writing to one person, the speaker, by including the reader in that exchange, is inviting us into that relationship. And so there are elements of collage. There are the speaker's parents' marriage license. So it's a very autobiographical book in big part, but it also, here, check it out. It's a really beautiful book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what do you teach this for? Like, what are the conversations like with students?
Yeah. So I teach this when I'm teaching the essay because I think that more than other forms of writing, the essay has I think, a bad reputation. We're taught to think of it as this kind of false, omniscient 5-paragraph, very dry thing, right? By the time we get to college, for many, I certainly didn't think essays were very fun for a long time. And so whenever I'm teaching any class that is partly centering, asking those who are there to write an essay, I always bring in essays that really can serve to shift and expand our awareness of what an essay is and can be. So this is a book of essays, and it has imagery, and it has poetry, and it has quoted, quotes from others, and handwritten aspects, and ephemera, and family archive. And I also love to teach it when I'm teaching research-based courses, because there's no reason a conversation with a beloved or a family photograph can't be a really strong element of research. And it's exciting to me to see where students take the essay once they start to really change their mind about what an essay is and what it can be.
It's a really good point. So my designer he's a good friend of mine. He works at the Ann Arbor District Library.
Yeah.
And he designs book covers.
Cool.
So, he loves, I send him everything that I think he will think is cool.
Yeah.
But we both love essays.
Yeah.
At this point in my life, I probably read them as much as I do fiction. C.J. Hauser, The Crane Wife. Have you read that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah?
It's one of the best books I've ever read.
Amazing.
And it's just an example of how, essays can be a lot more than you think they can be. And the more I've read and the more diverse topics they've covered, I loved Erosion, Essays of Undoing by Terry Tempest Williams, because and they don't even necessarily have to be connected directly. That's what makes it cool.
Yeah.
I think essay books are vital.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's just a lot of room in the essay to explore. And, I think of the essay in the Montaigne tradition, and I think of the essay as an attempt at meaning, not kind of a delivery of factual information always and only, right? Of course, works of journalism and more omniscient voiced essayistic modes are impactful and wonderful, but why so many folks have the first person voice kind of worked out of them when learning the essay, and why there can be kind of this hard line between the personal and the academic or scholarly. I'm really all about collapsing those boundaries.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting too, because in The Crane Wife, C.J. Hauser has this tactic that I think is really subtle, but in almost every essay, it seems, there's a moment where C.J. says, I think what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Working it out in the middle of the essay.
Yeah.
I like people that do that, because it doesn't sound like, I'm telling you how it is.
Absolutely.
It's just, I'm trying to figure out through this writing how I feel, meaning making. So that's just, it's a little trick, but it makes you stop and say, okay, I've said all these things, and I still might not really fully be able to communicate it. So this is what I'm trying to say. Let me go further. I like that.
I like that too. I think and I teach a lot of undergraduate writing courses, and I think it can take, I know for me it took a lot of years to learn that, as you're saying, I could be uncertain on the page and it wouldn't be, for lack of nuance, held against me by the reader. I think that there can be, there was something I think that I absorbed about the essay early on, which was that it was not a place that was friendly to ambiguity, uncertainty, self-disclosure, self-discovery, which is so wrong.
I mean,
Like now I'm like, no,
it's like every good essay book is
what it is, right? Like that's absolutely what it is.
Well, because in Groundglass, so many of your moments, for me, this is my interpretation of it, come in the form of questions.
Yeah.
Where you're wondering about something, whether it's about your body, or the environment. It's just your relationship to native land.
Yeah.
And how to talk about it. Yeah. You're constantly wondering about these things. You're not saying this is what it is. So I think you practice that a lot. And that's what makes it good.
Yeah.
Because I don't think readers want, a lot of readers I know don't want certainty.
Right.
I think that's the problem with the world.
Yeah.
Is just like you said, you felt like maybe, I can't do that. I can't have this ambiguity. So many spaces feel that like restrictive, that you have to have certitude. Otherwise, you don't know. And that's not good. And so that forces a lot of pressure in people's lives. So to read essay books for me is a form of letting go of that need to feel certain. And the more I've read, it's just kind of been like a constant, just the train keeps moving because it's a reminder. It's okay. It's okay not to know. Yeah. It's okay not to be certain. You don't need to seem smart. You don't need to be clever. I love that conversation with writers. Yeah. The moments or, the development from feeling like you need to be a clever writer to rather an honest one. And I like honest things. I don't want something that's seeming to be something.
Well, and that was a big concern because I think with Groundglass, one promise that I thought I was making with the reader is that by the end of the book, I would be able to say something about causality and the causal links between environmental exposure to contamination and disease. I remember for many drafts thinking, is it going to be a dissatisfying read if at the end of this journey there's no conclusive evidence for this relationship? And it was really a big question for me as I was writing. And I felt a lot of pressure to write toward something conclusive. And I had to really be okay with the essay not going there because the research wasn't going there. And that was really surprising. Yeah. And for a long time, I think I thought, I just haven't done enough research yet, or I haven't found.
Yeah, you think you do more than it's going to lead to something that you thought it would.
Yeah.
But it never does.
But and then I think in terms of thinking about the bigger, you kind of, well, what then of that, right? And then to think about environmental racism and how that alongside this deeply litigious society, how many communities and families have been asked to prove causality to then receive justice, right? That justice is so often, I think this is very problematic, justice is so often meted out along lines of causality. And I think that's a very big failure of our culture.
And yet, and again, this is just always my interpretation of your book.
Yeah. One
of the really important moments for me was when you had the reference to framing cancer as an individual battle.
Right.
That if they overcome it, right? That is it's a one-on-one fight, or even just a fight with your own body. And how that, I don't remember the exact line, but this was a really big moment. But what it does is it completely distances this human who has clearly been affected by contamination and pollution. And it just abdicates them from responsibility totally, because they're not even in this story now. It's just me fighting against cancer.
Right.
And we love that, but that narrative is missing a lot.
It is missing a lot.
But I think that goes to the causality and the problems is
Yeah.
that even in that dialogue, right, that language, we aren't even referencing what the
Yeah.
cause is.
Yeah.
It's just how do you fight it once you have it. But yeah, I think what you're saying about not leading to something,
Yeah.
there's a strange satisfaction in that, though, for a lot
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah.
There's a book that's making a comeback. At least it feels like. I've seen more and more people read it. Stoner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my friend said it best. It's mediocrity. There's nothing that happens. And it's strange how you keep going and you like it anyway.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it isn't leading to anything. It's
Yeah.
just showing this Midwestern professor's life, growing up on
Yeah.
a farm, leaving. It's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
But there's something that we all resonate with, that is this is life.
Yeah.
So yeah, not everything needs to have that build up.
Yeah.
There's plenty
Yeah.
to be said for the process
Yeah.
of the
Absolutely.
research and you revealing these things that don't lead to a conclusion. I think
Yeah.
that's important. But what you do is you beg the question to people, if this is what the burden of proof is,
Yeah.
what do we do about that?
Right.
That if justice is so tied to that,
Right.
it's a confounding situation. And I think that's why we don't often get justice.
Well, and I think it gets back to, this is something Rebecca Jim had said, and we were talking about cancer clusters, and what a cancer cluster is it's a high enough, it's quite, it's, quite bleak. It's a high enough number of people who have been diagnosed with, or oftentimes died from, the same disease, who live close enough to the same contamination that there can be a causal link, right? And that link can be made sometimes, and then when it is made, it's called a cancer cluster. But there's so many more places where all that would be required to prove that kind of causality, people don't move, right? That's one variable. People have deeply interconnected lives that are clearly traceable. There are so many conditions that are hard to line up to prove, okay, yeah, you know what? This community that lives adjacent to this chemical manufacturer, yes, this corporation is culpable in their well-being, or in their experiences of illness. It takes so much to get there, and I guess that's what I mean when I say, if that's the measure of justice, if that degree of proof is what is the baseline for people who have been sickened by a particular corporation's actions within their community to receive any kind of gesture of responsibility, it's such a high bar, and it leaves out almost everybody. And that, if that's the bar, who does that benefit? It doesn't benefit many, many, many community members who may be experiencing health harms, right, caused by industrial contamination. So that, I think that needs to change.
Yeah, because the people that benefit are just the corporations that are able to not be held responsible for almost everything.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Right? When I was talking with Lauren,
Yeah.
she mentioned that the thing that really drew her to Rebecca is the persistence.
Yes,
when
absolutely.
most people would quit.
Yes.
When you hit that roadblock, most people give up on these things.
Yes.
Because it just seems like too insurmountable, but there are people that will just keep going. She did another documentary at a boarding school in Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Damon, same thing.
Yeah.
They're just going to keep going.
Yeah.
Because there's something, we need people like that. I don't blame people that look at, well, if that's what we need to get justice, when are we ever going to get it? And to see these corporations be let off the hook constantly, I think it leads to a lot of apathy.
Yeah.
Why try?
Yeah.
But I also think that doesn't honor the people that have been affected and lost their lives because of this. I think it's important to keep going. But yeah, it's frustrating to see the bar and how almost no one can meet it.
Yeah, it is.
What do you do about that?
Well, I think that one thing that stories do is create these alignments that are forged upon similar experiences. And I think that's not the same form of justice as, what we could consider corporate accountability or something like that. But I think that that's very powerful. I think that when people can feel less alone in their pain, that is a type of justice too.
That's why, to me, this work's so important. Writers are so important. So I celebrate you,
Thank you, Matt.
because it's just beautiful what you're doing for us. I don't know if you have, I saw Charles. Mm-hmm. There's a book. Do you have time just to talk about his at least?
Sure, yeah.
To end, since I'm going to see him tomorrow anyway.
Yeah, let's talk about
I was like, we should.
about it. I know.
Speaking of people and
we should. Well, we both know the wonderful photographer, Thomas Stauffer, who is working on a new series inspired by Charles Baxter's Wonderlands. Mm-hmm. And so I couldn't not grab Wonderlands, Essays on the Life of Literature, when I knew we'd be talking.
So good. This is the only one that I've read so far.
We got to talk about it. Okay, good.
So let's talk.
Well, what do you love about this book?
I just thought that, it was a new way to consider.
Yeah.
Story.
Yeah.
And I like when, I watched an interview too where he kind of talks through all of the framing of the book. And I just like being able to think about something in a new way. Yeah. And it's not surprising to me that it inspired Tema.
Yes.
Because it is a framework now to see. Yeah. Right. And to listen. And so, to me, it was just, Charles is really good.
Yeah.
At helping you understand stories and the structure of them. And why? What was the? Oh my gosh! I'm blanking on the essay or a book of short stories that is amazing. Well, there's
something I want you to
do.
Yeah, there's something I want you to do. Yeah,
totally blanking.
Yeah, no, I mean we've been talking about a bunch of books. Yeah.
Right, but even that question, right? You can tell he's a teacher. Yeah. So to me, this felt like being in class in a way.
Oh, totally.
So I love that.
Yeah. No, I'm very honored to say that he's been a teacher of mine and is so good at teaching the craft of writing. So wise. And something you had said earlier reminded me of something that he said in the last class I took with him. It was a fiction writing class, and I think about this a lot. There are two things he said in that class that I remember that I think about a lot. And one is when we were talking about essay, if there's a problem about the writing, put it in the writing. And I love this idea from Charlie that if you're working something out as the writer, why not in some way show your hand to the reader? Or if your character is struggling with something, why not kind of have that in the way that I interpret this advice, have some kind of out on the page. Yeah. And I love that. And also he said something like all writing is contending with questions of power. And I think that all of the books that I've chosen in some way very differently are looking at these distinct power structures that exist in relationships that are familial and intimate, or that are social and political, or that are rooted in something like a marriage. So I think about that a lot.
That's an obvious thread in that. Yeah. As you're talking.
I find it very compelling to think about the question of, in a way, it's also a question of care. Where is care being shown? Where is care not being shown? So it's very true that he's been a very influential mentor to me. Yeah. But this book, Wonderlands, is so awesome. And I have been rereading the title essay, Wonderlands, which is one where, as he writes, a correspondence exists between mood and place, and the energy goes in both directions. A character's mood or condition may generate a setting, or the setting may generate an inescapable mood or emotion thanks to the X factor. So this idea that setting can be as alive as character, and can be kind of deeply influential to story is also something I just find really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's talked about that before. People have
Yeah.
always asked him a lot of people always want to know about writers. How does a specific place make a story?
Yeah.
But for Charlie, it seems like it's not really that. It's not about the Midwest. It's
Right.
not about the
Right.
South. It's about just place itself.
It's such a great quality of story, I think, when setting and character have some kind of relationship that's playing out between them. And I think that, with what you were saying about his work and the way that it's working with place, and yes, there is a strong regional aspect, but where my mind is going now is thinking about some of what he has said about the request moment, and that relationships can be these places too, right? Kind of this idea of the relationship between the characters, as just as much contributing to that wonderland aspect as the place itself. It doesn't move in one direction. There's this dialogue that's kind of being created between the characters and the place, and that could be something as intimate and domestic as the space of a home or a particular region, but that it isn't one directional.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, it's so good. And I'm glad Temma's following that in her own work.
Yeah.
Because it's just an extension of that. Like I said, I love the relationships between writers or photographers, whatever it is, and how a lot of their work is in conversation.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. But I'm really excited to talk to Charlie, and I knew you would pick. I didn't know it would be this one, but I knew it was something. I really liked The Soul Thief.
Yeah.
There was something about that book that.
What was it for you?
That I wasn't really sure, first of all, what the point was in the middle. I guess it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
Or maybe I was confusing myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was something that felt very odd about that book. That was unsettling throughout. I suppose the scene that sticks out the most, and I referenced this actually in my last conversation for Books on the Bed with a bookstore owner in Hazard, Kentucky.
Yeah.
But there was something about it, the main character's relationship with his sister.
Okay.
And when she can't speak, really, and then he has that breakdown, and then she comes to read to him, and then she talks about how he said, "Why did this wake you up? Why, how are you doing this? Right? It's kind of like a miracle." And she talks about how when she was not able to speak, really, he would call her and tell her stories from his life. And I will remember that forever.
Yeah.
It's just, even though it's a very specific part of the book, but that chapter felt really powerful to me. There are other moments in other books or just in life that I think about the idea of storytelling as revival.
Yeah.
And that relationship between them was completely hinged on one person not being capable of reciprocating in that moment, but they do it at different times when they need it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was really beautiful.
I mean, it makes me think kind of in a lot of ways about how we started off talking about escapes and about Joy Williams writing, and how you don't often know what of your own actions is going to stick out in someone's mind, and good and bad, right? I think I know in my life I've been oblivious to certain pain that I've caused, and I know I've been oblivious to certain feelings of joy. And that's an odd thing about relationships. I think that we don't often know what's going to stick out from our behavior, our demeanor, and I think that's really what I love about short stories, especially, is that they get at some of those points of connection and misconnection so beautifully.
Yeah, it's interesting that's in the thread throughout this conversation of it's just hard to understand each other.
It is.
And also, if no one vocalizes
Right.
to the other person how their behavior is affecting them,
Right.
then you're always going to be in the dark.
Right.
And then certain people might respond a certain way, and then you're wondering why.
Yeah.
You might be able to guess, but they're not telling you.
Yeah.
This is where like it's all lost in.
Yeah.
Because there's no understanding coming to. And yeah, it's true. I think it's kind of it's sad to recognize the ways in which you've caused people hurt.
Yeah.
Because it just makes you feel like, no, I was so careless, right?
Right.
We were talking about that earlier too. It's just I think there's a fine line between living how you want to live and that being a justification
Yeah.
for being reckless with people's emotions. I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. So but being careful means trying to, if you know that you've caused these things, or even but that's why it's good to do good things for people.
Yeah.
It's because they might not vocalize it, but something might really mean something to someone.
Yeah.
That you did, that you said.
It's true.
So
it's true.
Always, right? That's why I always give people praise, encouragement, because you can't have enough of that, because you never know that they might be getting none.
Yeah. It's really true. It's really true. And I mean, I think also back to reading, it's maybe one of its clearest points of generosity is that in some ways it's not rooted in dialogue. It's actually just this opportunity to sit with another person's experience of memory, of the passage of time, of their internal ideas and feelings toward a particular experience. I feel like whether it is nonfiction or fiction, whether it's someone who's alive or dead, that you can, through reading, be with another's experience of what it was to be alive. That is incredibly powerful to me.
You said that before, and I've noted that. I've started using that, be with. I like that. It's company. That we talked about this a lot in that class, entering another's experience.
Yeah.
And that was particularly important for me because I think a lot of people take for granted that I still do have Tourette syndrome, and it affects everything. And that class, we read Motherless Brooklyn. I was petrified because the only time anyone ever considered me was to laugh at me, make me feel bad. And that was the first time in my life that I was taken seriously as someone to be careful with. And like to have a teacher who is calling out when people are saying this is a disease. She's like, it's not a disease. Right? No one had ever defended me. No one had ever made corrections of other people. Right? And so that's why I think I empathize a lot with, what are the ways in which we can perhaps make a compromise on something? People get hung up on pronouns or, but more of it's just not understanding what it feels like to be another person and how a small thing that you might do can completely change their day, And so for me, it had always been, we're going to make fun of you. We're going to go away from you, or we're going to make light of your condition. And that was more like, let's seriously consider what it's like to have this mind that is uncontrollable, a body that's uncontrollable. And it's in a detective, like a crime book. So it was, again, it brought you into the space of my mind without you having to just talk exclusively about a person with Tourette syndrome. So it's like that, that was really huge. But it felt like people were with me. I was with myself.
Yeah, I was wondering.
And I'd never been, and I think that's what scared me. I almost dropped the class. And then Elise, the professor, she was monumental in my just development as a human.
Yeah.
Just opened my world because it was an exchange of listening and learning about people, As much as I read Giovanni's Room and Ruby Fruit Jungle and, the Birch Bark House, no one had ever read about me. I'd never read about me. That was weird. It was unsettling, So yeah, to have someone that doesn't have Tourette describe the experience of the mind. I guess sometimes it's weird to have that happen, and you recognize yourself in a character for the first time. It was great.
Yeah.
But it was also like I was scared to open the book because I was afraid of what it might say about me and how it might make me feel. So yeah. But anyway, I like that language. I've started using that to be with, because that's really what it is.
It's so cool to me. Thank you for telling me that. It's so cool to me to think about in that classroom at that time. I feel like what you're describing is having this experience of seeing aspects of yourself reflected in this fictional story, and then also seeing your professor advocate for and make lovely those aspects in that work like that. It's like, it's nice, right? When you see someone love and care about a character that you see yourself in, because it's honors our privacy at the same time as showing a lot of value that I think, I know I've felt that same thing, like seeing someone else value a character that I feel like I can relate to.
Yeah.
It's both this moment of privacy, but also this moment of like self-recognition. And it's a beautiful feeling.
You don't know it in the moment, but I think at least in my experience, you start to learn not to take yourself seriously.
Yeah.
And so then you don't occupy space in the world, and that's a really sad thing to withdraw, because you feel like you don't belong anywhere. And to be completely helpless in that, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
So if this is what my life is going to be like, it's better to be alone.
Yeah.
Which it's not, obviously. But
No.
but that, even though I still struggled with depression and I still do.
Yeah.
Like, I think part of the reason I didn't do a podcast, or I didn't try to, like, I always felt like I had these ideas. I suppose I was afraid of judgment. Because I just had still, even with that class, there wasn't a lot of moments where college was really important, where people started being careful with me.
Yeah.
And like actually being curious and like making me feel as though I could talk about it. I didn't say the words Tourette syndrome till I was like 18. And actually, when I first got to Michigan, it was the first friend I'd ever made in my hall, another kid that had Tourette syndrome. He just asked me point blank in the union first week. He's like, "Hey, do you have Tourette's?" I was like, "Get away," But then he sits down and says, "So do I." I didn't realize how much I needed that. It gave me confidence that here's this story, here's this professor who also like took my feedback. She's like, "I've never had someone in this class before with Tourette syndrome and taught this book. Let's talk about how to teach it," right? Like, she was then considering, oh yeah, maybe I need to rethink the way I structure these conversations in class, and because I have someone here that has actually experienced this. Yeah, it was really important. It made me feel like a whole person.
Yeah.
That I didn't have to disguise that, And that's the best language I can say is, if you try to kill a part of yourself, you kill all the best parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is why this is so important to me. I felt what books can do, not just for yourself, like in your own identities, but that human exchange of stories it's really just it's one of the few things in life that I think can bring us together.
Yeah.
And data, there's an economist in England that kind of realized you have to put a story to these things that we tend to present numbers with, because otherwise it's not going to get to anybody. And I really resonated with that.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that was a little long-winded, but...
No, thank you for sharing with me. I mean, it does... You mentioned Be With, and that's the title of this really beautiful book of poems by Forrest Gander that I love. And the epigraph to that book I think about a lot, which is, what the epigraph is the political begins in intimacy. And I love that idea so much. I think that that's quite true. I think that's quite profound, that things that are consequential in life are intimate, and that intimacy is not divorced from the political, that consequence and attention and close engagement. It's so important. And it's not the same thing as understanding. And I hope I never feel secure in my knowledge, because it would mean I'd given up on trying to begin to understand so many people and aspects of life that I want to always be trying to get closer to and trying to know more about.